Well, the United Nations is using World Refugee Day to call attention to the challenges faced by the millions around the globe. For more now, I'm joined by Michel Gabaudan, President of Refugees International. Welcome to the broadcast.
Good evening.
It's really disturbing watching our report by Kate Parkinson, seeing the migrants so desperate in that piece right there. Explain to our audience, first of all, the difference between the refugee crisis and the migrant crisis and those who are migrant refugees.
Well, refugees are people who flee persecution and who, by definition, cannot be returned to their countries because they would suffer repression.
Right.
Migrants are people who flee for other reasons, to improve their life, but the return to their country is, in the worst case, a return to the poverty they were fleeing, but not to persecution. And therefore, the world has an obligation towards refugees, while for migrants it's a more complex issue to discuss in the frame of economical development.
Right now, there tend to be many more migrants in jeopardy right now than refugees, but the refugees have a tough plight. Tell us what they're up against these days.
Well, first, the numbers. The numbers have topped 60 million. There haven't been such a high number of people displaced by violence, either within or outside of their countries, since the Second World War. So it's reaching the proportion where humanitarian agencies have difficulties to respond. And to the time they remain refugee. I mean, 10 years ago, the average time someone would be a refugee was something between 12 and 13 years. Today, it's over 17 years. So what you have is more people fleeing, but less that are able to go home because a solution has been brought to the condition in their country.
Syria is the biggest source of refugees right now, but you also have those in sub-Saharan Africa, also Asia, Myanmar, Central America. Is there one group of people who are, with the odds, likely to turn out better in the end, or have it better?
Well, right now, I can't see any group that is really having it better. I mean, it's very difficult. You cannot compare suffering and misery. It would be totally unfair. Syria is the largest group. Countries that are hosting Syrian refugees have hosted such large numbers that it's starting to create some stability problem within their country. I mean, some of the population is starting to react to the generosity of their governments. So this is an issue that we have to pay particular attention to. But there are many other places in the world. I mean, Kenya has been hosting Somali refugees for the past 30 years.
Right.
And there is no sign that these people can go back. There have been refugees in Colombia, from Colombia in Ecuador for 30 years. There have been refugees from Afghanistan in Pakistan for 30 years. These are not really going back home.
The UN is calling for developing countries to shoulder some of the support. Why is that working? Not working because money is so tight.
Well, there are three ways. First, let's not forget that more than 85% of the refugees are in the developing world. They are not in the developed world. They remain very close to the countries that they have fled. There are three ways the developed world can help. One is to increase their support to humanitarian response. Right now, for example, you're talking about the Syrian crisis. Not even 25% of the budget requested by the UN has been funded half year through. So all the agencies, the UN and the international NGOs who are trying to respond, are well beyond schedule, if you want. Then there's the question of development. More and more refugees have been, as I mentioned, very long time in the countries that host them. More and more refugees are not in camps. They are spread out in the local population. And we need to give development support to the countries who host them. That's structural support to their ministries, etc. And that is not really happening. And the third aspect is that the developed world could take more of the most vulnerable refugees for whom staying in the initial country they fled to still present problems of survival, of protection. And there the numbers are not very big. The US is the most generous country by all means. Europe is really doing very little, and the narrative we hear is not helping. We hear that these people are gatecrashers, are terrorists, are free riders. It's not true. These are people fleeing unspeakable violence. And let's not forget that. I'm talking about refugees, not the migrants.
Right, and the odds are certainly stacked against them right now with so many conflicts going on, and until these conflicts are resolved, the issue will remain.
Yes.
Well, Michel Gabaudan, thank you so much for your time on this very important day. We appreciate your time.
My pleasure.